The stars stretched endlessly in all directions as Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon. His weathered hands gripped the metal railing while he watched the distant glow of KEPLER 442 be growing larger on the main screen. 3,000 years had passed since the last war in the galaxy, and Jake had never seen a battlefield in his 42 years of life. The ship hummed quietly around him as 10,000 colonists slept in their quarters, dreaming of the new world that would become their home. Among them were 3,000 children, their young faces peaceful in sleep, unaware that they were about to become part of the greatest expansion in human history. Dr. Lisa Parker walked through the corridors of the educational bay, her soft footsteps echoing in the quiet space. She paused at the viewing port where 8-year-old Kevin Chun pressed his small hands against the reinforced glass, staring at the alien constellations with wide eyes full of wonder. "Are there really friendly aliens on the new planet?" Kevin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa smiled and knelt beside him. "Yes, Kevin, the Zephyrians have been our friends for hundreds of years. They build the most beautiful crystal gardens you've ever seen." The boy's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Will they teach me how to grow crystals?" "I'm sure they will," Lisa replied, gently ruffling his dark hair. The Zephyrians love sharing their knowledge with human children. In the main conference room, Ambassador Peter Davis reviewed the diplomatic files for the 100th time. The Treaty of Eternal Harmony lay spread across the holographic display, its ancient text glowing softly in the dim light. 3 millennia of peace had been built on this document, signed by every major species in the galaxy. Peter touched the human signature on the treaty, remembering the stories his grandfather had told him about the old wars. Those tales seemed like fantasy now, stories of human warriors who once fought across the stars with a fury that made entire civilizations tremble. But that was ancient history, from a time when humanity was young and angry. The intercom crackled. "To life, all passengers to viewing stations. We are approaching the Zephyrian escort point." Throughout the ship, families gathered at the massive windows to watch the alien vessels appear. The Zephyrian ships materialized like living jewels, their crystalline hulls catching the light from the nearby star and throwing rainbows across the void. Children gasped in delight while their parents smiled at the beautiful display. Captain Greg Sullivan received the incoming transmission from the lead Zephyrian vessel. The alien commander's voice was like music, each word carefully formed in perfect human speech. "Welcome, New Horizon. It is our honor to guide you to your new home. The children of Earth are always welcome in our space." Greg responded with equal formality. "Thank you, Commander Veltar. We are grateful for your protection." The Zephyrian ships moved with fluid grace, forming a protective formation around the human colony vessel. Their escort was both ceremonial and practical, a symbol of the peace that had allowed such trust to flourish between species. In the children's quarters, 12-year-old Amy Roberts sat at her small desk, sketching the alien landscapes that filled the screens around the ship. Her drawing pad was filled with images of crystal cities and floating gardens, all copied from the educational materials about their new home. "Look at this one, Amy," called her friend Kevin from across the room. He held up a picture of a Zephyrian child, its translucent skin shimmering with soft light. "They're so pretty." Amy nodded, adding delicate details to her drawing. "My dad says they live for 1,000 years. Imagine all the things they must know." The ship's artificial gravity made the journey comfortable, but nothing could contain the excitement of the colonists as they approached their destination. Families planned their new lives while children dreamed of adventures on an alien world. Jake Morrison called up the colony records on his personal terminal. New Eden would be the 47th human colony established under the Confederation's expansion program. Each settlement had been welcomed with open arms by the local species, their new human neighbors bringing fresh perspectives and innovations to worlds that had known only peace. The commander remembered his training at the academy, where they taught diplomacy and exploration, not warfare. The old military academies had been converted into centers of learning and culture. The weapons factories had become shipyards for exploration vessels. Humanity had transformed itself from a warrior species into something better. Dr. Parker made her evening rounds through the medical bay, checking on the few children who had minor injuries from playing in the ship's recreation areas. The worst injury was a scraped knee from a boy who had fallen while running. In the old days, her ancestors would have treated battle wounds and radiation burns. Now she bandaged small cuts and prescribed rest for tired explorers. "Dr. Parker," called Kevin from his bed where he was supposed to be sleeping. "Are you excited about the new planet?" "Very excited," she replied, tucking his blanket around him. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll be in orbit around your new home." The boy closed his eyes obediently, but his mind was still racing with thoughts of crystal gardens and alien friends. Around him, other children whispered quietly about the adventures waiting for them on the surface below. Ambassador Davis stood in the observation lounge, watching the escort ships guide them through the final approach. The Zephyrian vessels moved like dancers, their formation perfect and graceful. It was hard to believe that any species had ever fought wars in this peaceful galaxy. The communication from the surface base crackled through the ship's speakers. "New Horizon, this is New Eden Ground Control. Landing Pad 7 is prepared for your arrival. The welcoming committee is ready to meet our newest colonists." Jake Morrison felt a surge of pride as he prepared to deliver 10,000 humans to their new home. The colonists had been selected from volunteers across human space, each family chosen for their skills and their commitment to building a better future among the stars. The children pressed against every available window as the ship descended through the atmosphere. Below them, the crystal cities of the Zephyrians sparkled like diamonds scattered across a green landscape. Human settlements dotted the continent, their familiar architecture blending harmoniously with the alien structures. "There it is," Amy whispered, pointing at the landing pad where crowds of humans and Zephyrians waited to greet them. "Our new home." The ship touched down with barely a tremor, its advanced systems ensuring a smooth arrival. The airlock doors opened with a soft hiss, and the warm air of Kepler 442b flowed into the ship, carrying the scent of alien flowers and the promise of new beginnings. As the colonists filed out into their new world, none of them could imagine that this moment of perfect peace would be the last they would know for a very long time. The galaxy had forgotten the fury that once burned in human hearts, and humanity had forgotten the fire that their ancestors carried across the stars. But some things, once awakened, can never truly sleep again. 3 months had passed since the colonists arrived on Kepler 442b, and New Eden was thriving under the careful guidance of Colony Administrator Ben Wright. The settlement sprawled across a green valley, its white buildings gleaming in the alien sun, while crystal gardens from their Zephyrian neighbors created rainbow patterns across the landscape. Ben stood in his office reviewing the daily reports, satisfaction growing in his chest as he read about successful harvests, completed construction projects, and the steady stream of new friendships forming between human and Zephyrian families. The children had adapted fastest of all, their laughter echoing through the crystal gardens where they played alongside young Zephyrians who sparkled like living gems. Dr. Lisa Parker walked through the children's common area, watching Kevin Chun teach a group of Zephyrian youngsters how to play a simple earth game with colored stones. The alien children's translucent skin shifted through pleased shades of blue and green as they laughed at Kevin's patient instructions. "You throw the stone like this," Kevin demonstrated, his small hand flicking the smooth rock across the crystalline surface. "Then you try to hit the target." The Zephyrian children attempted to copy his movements, their longer fingers making the motion look like a graceful dance. When one of them succeeded in hitting the target, both human and alien children cheered. Together, Amy Roberts sat nearby, sketching the scene in her ever-present drawing pad. Her artistic skills had improved dramatically since arriving on the planet, inspired by the beautiful alien architecture and the way light played through the crystal structures. She had filled 3 books with drawings of her new home. "Amy, look what I made," called her friend Kevin, holding up a small crystal sculpture that one of the Zephyrian children had helped him create. The translucent figure seemed to glow with inner light. Amy smiled and added the crystal to her drawing, capturing the way it caught the afternoon sun. It's beautiful, Kevin. You're getting really good at crystal shaping. The peaceful routine of colony life continued around them. Adults worked in the fields and workshops while children learned and played. The Zephyrians shared their knowledge freely, teaching humans about crystal cultivation, energy harvesting, and the careful balance that kept their world so pristine. Far across the galaxy, in the darker regions of space where the Confederation's influence was weak, War Chief Thakmor of the Corvani Empire studied reports from his scouts. The Corvani were a brutal species, their society built on conquest and domination. They had watched the galaxy's long peace with growing disgust, convinced that 3,000 years without war had made all species weak and foolish. The humans. Settle another world, Thakmor growled to his assembled war council, his scarred face twisted with contempt. They bring their young with them, unguarded and soft. The galaxy has forgotten what strength means. His lieutenant, a younger warrior, named Bractor, leaned forward eagerly. What are your orders, War Chief? Thakmor's eyes glowed with cruel intelligence. We will remind them. If we take the human young, we break their spirit and prove that this peace is nothing but weakness. The galaxy will remember what happens to those who forget the laws of strength. The War Council murmured agreement, their battle-scarred faces eager for conflict. They had grown restless during the long peace, their warrior culture stagnating without enemies to fight. The humans would provide the perfect target to demonstrate Corveni superiority on New Eden. The colonists prepared for sleep as the alien sun set behind the crystal spires. Dr. Parker made her evening rounds through the children's dormitories, checking on the young ones who had been so excited about their new home. Most were already asleep, their faces peaceful in the soft light from the crystal formations that grew around the settlement. "Good night, Dr. Parker," whispered Kevin from his bed, clutching the crystal sculpture his alien friend had helped him make. "Good night, Kevin," she replied softly, adjusting his blanket. "Sweet dreams." Amy Roberts was still awake, adding final touches to her latest drawing by the light of a small crystal lamp. The picture showed human and Zephyrian children playing together in the garden, their faces bright with joy. "Lights out, Amy," Dr. Parker said gently. "You can finish that tomorrow." The girl nodded and closed her drawing pad, settling into bed with the satisfaction of another day well spent. Around her, other children slept soundly. Dreaming of crystal gardens and alien friends, the attack came in the deepest part of the night cycle, when the settlement's defenses were minimal and most colonists were asleep. The Corvani strike ships descended from the dark sky like falling stones, their black hulls invisible against the starlit darkness. Dr. Parker woke to the sound of screaming and the harsh buzz of plasma weapons. She bolted upright in her quarters, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The settlement's alarm system began wailing, its urgent tone cutting through the night. She ran barefoot through the corridors toward the children's dormitories, her heart pounding with fear. The sounds of battle grew louder as she approached, plasma fire lighting up the windows with deadly flashes of colored light. The dormitory door had been blasted open, its metal frame twisted and smoking. Inside, armored Corvani soldiers were herding terrified human children toward the windows where hovering transport pods waited. The aliens moved with brutal efficiency, their weapons trained on any adult who tried to intervene. "Kevin!" Dr. Parker screamed, seeing the boy being dragged toward one of the pods. His eyes were wide with terror as he struggled against the alien soldier's grip. Amy Roberts was fighting back, her small fists beating against the armor of the Corvani who held her. Her drawing pad lay trampled on the floor, its pages scattered and torn. Other children cried and screamed as they were forced into the transport pods. Corvani soldier noticed Dr. Parker and raised his weapon. She dove behind an overturned bed as plasma fire scorched the wall where she had been standing. The smell of burned metal and ozone filled the air. "Please," she begged, crawling toward the alien soldier. "Don't hurt them. They're just children." The soldier's response was to fire again, forcing her to retreat further into the room. Through the windows, she could see the transport pods filling with human children, their young faces pressed against the transparent walls in terror. Colony Administrator Ben Wright burst into the dormitory with a group of security officers, but they were too late. The transport pods were already lifting off, carrying their precious cargo toward the waiting Corvani ships. The adult humans could only watch helplessly as their children disappeared into the night sky. Jake Morrison received the emergency transmission as he patrolled the outer system in his command ship. His voice remained calm and professional as he acknowledged the report, but something cold and hard settled in his chest as he listened to the details. 47 children taken, Van Wright's voice crackled through the communication system. 12 injured, 3 dead. The Corvani left a message demanding the dissolution of the Confederation. Jake's hands tightened on the control console. In his 42 years of life, he had never felt anything like the rage that was building inside him. The emotion was foreign and powerful, like a sleeping giant stirring to life. All ships converge. On the planet, he ordered, his voice carrying a new edge that his crew had never heard before. Emergency protocols are now in effect. The Corvani transmission reached the colony shortly after dawn, broadcast on all frequencies so that every human in the system could hear it. War Chief Thakmer's scarred face filled the screens, his eyes bright with cruel satisfaction. "People of the weak Confederation," he began, his voice harsh and grating. "We have taken your young to demonstrate your weakness. Each day that passes, without the dissolution of your pathetic treaty, we will execute one child. The galaxy will learn that strength, not peace, is the natural order." Dr. Parker watched the transmission with growing horror, her hands shaking as she tended to the injured children who had been left behind. Around her, the colonists stood in stunned silence, their peaceful world shattered by an act of unthinkable cruelty. Ambassador Peter Davis received the news at the Confederation Council on the Capital World. As he listened to the report, something ancient and terrible stirred in his memory. Stories his grandfather had told him about the old days, when humanity was young and angry, began to make sense in a way they never had before. The galaxy had forgotten why humanity was once called the warrior species. But as news of the children's capture spread across human space, something that had slept for 3,000 years began to wake up. The peace was broken, and humanity was about to remember what they had once been. The emergency session of the Confederation Council convened within hours of the attack, representatives from dozens of species gathering in the great crystal chamber on the capital world. The air hummed with tension as delegates discussed the crisis that had shattered 3 millennia of peace. The Altarian delegate, her silver skin shimmering with nervous energy, spoke first. "We must negotiate with these Corvani. Surely they can be reasoned with. No civilized species would harm children for political gain." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Proximate Ambassador nodded his large head, his multiple eyes blinking in sequence. "Economic sanctions have always worked in the past. We can force them to comply through trade restrictions." The Zephyrian representative, her crystalline form casting rainbow patterns on the walls, added her musical voice to the discussion. "Perhaps we can offer them territory in exchange for the children. The Outer Rim has many uninhabited worlds." Ambassador Peter Davis sat in the human section, listening to each proposal with growing disbelief. His hands trembled as he gripped the armrests of his chair, but the trembling was not from fear. Something was stirring deep inside him, something that had been sleeping for countless generations. "You want to negotiate," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the chamber's chatter. The other delegates turned to look at him. Surprised by the strange tone in his words, Peter stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "You want to negotiate with creatures who steal children from their beds. You want to give them rewards for murder." The chamber fell silent. None of the assembled species had ever heard a human speak with such barely contained fury. For 3,000 years, humans had been the peacemakers, the diplomats, the voice of reason in every crisis. Ambassador Davis, the Altarian delegate, said gently, "We understand your distress, but violence will not solve this problem. The Kovani are expecting us to respond with force. We must be smarter than that. Peter's laugh was cold and bitter. Smart, yes, we have been very smart for 3,000 years. So smart that we forgot what happens when someone hurts our children. On New Eden, Jake Morrison coordinated with Colony Administrator Ben Wright to assess their defensive capabilities. The settlement had energy shields and basic weapons, but nothing designed for offensive operations. The nearest Confederation military base was 3 days away, and the children did not have 3 days. What about the old armories? Ben asked, his face pale with exhaustion. The ones from the early colonization days? Jake shook his head. Decommissioned and converted to storage facilities decades ago. We have mining equipment, construction tools, but no real weapons. In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa Parker tended to the injured children while coordinating with the parents who had lost their young ones. The grief and rage in their eyes was unlike anything she had ever seen. Parents who had spent their lives building a peaceful world now looked like they were ready to tear the galaxy apart with their bare hands. Dr. Parker, said Maria Santos, whose 6-year-old daughter had been taken, I want to help get them back. I don't care what it takes. Similar conversations were happening throughout the settlement. Teachers, farmers, engineers, all united by a fury that none of them had ever experienced before. They were discovering emotions their species had buried for millennia. Dr. Parker contacted her colleague Dr. Steve Martinez on Earth, using the emergency research protocols that had not been activated in living memory. Steve, I need access to the historical military archives. Full authorization, everything. Lisa, those files have been classified for 3,000 years, Steve replied, his voice uncertain. I'm not sure I can get clearance for that kind of information. Then get it, she said, her voice carrying an edge that made Steve take a step back from his communication screen. Children are dying and we need to remember how to fight. Across human space, the transformation was beginning. On every world, in every ship, in every settlement, humans were accessing databases that had been sealed since the Treaty of Eternal Harmony. Military manuals, tactical guides, weapon specifications, all the knowledge of war that humanity had promised to forget. Captain Helen Rodriguez commanded the exploration vessel Wanderer, currently surveying a Nebula 3 systems away from the crisis. Her crew of peaceful scientists watched in fascination as their captain pulled up files marked with warnings and security clearances. Captain, said her first officer, Dr. Mark Thompson, those are restricted military documents. Are you sure we should be accessing them? Helen's eyes never left the screen as she scrolled through formations and battle tactics. My niece was on that colony ship, Mark. She's 8 years old, and she's in the hands of monsters. I'm going to learn everything I can about killing them. The crew exchanged glances. They had served with Helen for 5 years, and they had never seen her like this. The gentle explorer who cataloged star formations and studied alien cultures was disappearing, replaced by something harder and more dangerous on Mars. Retired General Carl Anderson received the priority message while he was carefully brushing dirt from an ancient artifact. At 73, he had spent the last 20 years as an archaeologist, studying the peaceful cultures that had flourished during the long peace. His weathered hands shook as he read the message informing him that his granddaughter Emma was among the captured children. Carl stood slowly, his joints protesting after hours of careful excavation work. He walked to his personal safe and entered a combination that he had not used in decades. Inside, wrapped in preservation cloth, was a uniform he had hoped never to wear again. The old general contacted his former aide, Colonel Janet Rivers, now a teacher at the new Geneva Agricultural College. Janet, I need you to recall everyone. From the old Fourth Fleet, full reactivation protocols. Sir, there is no Fourth Fleet anymore, Janet replied, confusion clear in her voice. We're teachers and farmers now. The fleet was disbanded after the treaty. Then we rebuild it, Carl said simply. Because my granddaughter is in the hands of enemies, and I remember what we do to enemies. The Corvani monitoring stations intercepted the surge of human communications across the galaxy. War Chief Thakemore reviewed the data with growing puzzlement. The humans were accessing files that had been sealed for millennia. their communication patterns changing from peaceful exploration reports to something much more organized and purposeful. "What are they doing?" asked his Lieutenant Bractor. "Studying the intercepted transmissions." Thakmer growled low in his throat. "They appear to be researching their own history. Perhaps they seek to understand why they were once feared, though it will do them no good now." The first scheduled execution was set for the following day. The Corvani had selected Danny Foster, a 9-year-old boy from the agricultural section of New Eden. His parents had been among the first to volunteer for the colony, drawn by the promise of raising their children in a peaceful world. In the holding cells of the Corvani fortress, the captured children huddled together for warmth and comfort. Kevin Chin had become their unofficial leader, his young voice steady as he tried to comfort the younger ones. "My dad told me stories about the old days," Kevin whispered to Amy Roberts, who sat beside him clutching the torn remains of her drawing. "Pad, he said humans used to be warriors. He said we were the strongest fighters in the galaxy." Amy nodded, her young face set with determination. "My grandmother showed me pictures once, from before the peace. She said humans could be scary when they needed to be." Around them, other children listened with growing hope. Even in captivity, even facing an uncertain fate, they began to believe that help was coming. Something in their genetic memory was stirring, telling them that their people would not abandon them. The human fleet began to move. Ships designed for exploration and research started converging on Corvani space, their crews working frantically to install weapon systems based on designs that had not been used for 3,000 years. The peaceful explorers were becoming something the galaxy had not seen since the ancient wars. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, now designated as the flagship of the hastily assembled rescue fleet. Around him, his crew worked with grim efficiency, their movements sharp and purposeful. They were no longer the gentle colonists who had arrived at New Eden just months before. "All ships report ready for jump," announced his communications officer. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on the display showing the route to Corvani space. In 18 hours, they would arrive at the enemy's doorstep. The children had been taken, and humanity was about to remember why the galaxy had once trembled at their name. The transformation was complete. The peaceful species that had helped build the Confederation's golden age was gone, replaced by something older and infinitely more dangerous. The fire that had burned in human hearts for millions of years was awakening, and nothing would ever be the same. The transformation of humanity was swift and terrifying to witness. Within 18 hours of the children's capture, the entire human fleet across the galaxy had changed course, converging on Corvani space like a gathering storm. Ships that had been designed for peaceful exploration now bristled with weapons systems, hastily constructed from ancient blueprints. Captain Helen Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Wanderer, watching her crew work with cold efficiency that would have been impossible just days before. The gentle scientists who had spent years cataloging nebulae and studying alien cultures now moved with the precision of soldiers preparing for war. "Weapons systems online," reported Chief Engineer Tony Williams, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were doing. "All missile tubes loaded and ready for deployment." Helen nodded, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. The Wanderer was now part of the first wave assault fleet, leading a formation of 47 exploration vessels that had been transformed into instruments of war. Each ship carried weapons that had not been fired in 3,000 years. On Earth, General Carl Anderson stood in the hastily reactivated command center of the old 4th Fleet headquarters. The building had been a museum for centuries, its war rooms converted into displays showing the peaceful history of human expansion. Now those same rooms hummed with activity as retired military personnel answered the call to duty. "Sir, we have confirmation from all sectors," reported Colonel Janet Rivers, her teaching uniform replaced by the black and silver of the old fleet. 237 ships responding to mobilization orders. Carl studied the holographic display showing the positions of every human vessel in the galaxy. Each ship was moving with purpose toward the same destination, their crews. driven by a fury that had been sleeping in their DNA for millennia. "What about the Confederation Council?" Janet asked, her voice carefully neutral. "They're still debating," Carl replied with contempt. "They want to negotiate with child killers. They've forgotten that some problems can only be solved with force." The first execution was broadcast across the galaxy at exactly noon Corvani time. War Chief Thakmer stood before the camera, his scarred face twisted with satisfaction as he held 9-year-old Danny Foster by the arm. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, but he stood as straight as he could, trying to be brave. "This is what happens to the weak," Thakmer snarled into the camera. "This child dies because you refuse to acknowledge strength as the natural order." The plasma blade ignited with a soft hiss, its energy field glowing bright blue against the gray walls of the Corvani fortress. Danny Foster looked directly into the camera, his young voice clear and steady despite his fear. "Tell my mom and dad I love them," he said, his words carrying across the galaxy to every human who was watching. The blade fell. The silence that followed was deafening. Across human space, on every world and every ship, humans stopped what they were doing and stared at their screens. Parents held their children closer. Teachers closed their eyes and wept. Soldiers clenched their fists until their knuckles turned white. Jake Morrison received the transmission aboard his flagship, the Retribution, along with every other human in the fleet. He watched the execution in complete silence, his face showing no emotion as the boy died. When the transmission ended, he turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the Corvani," he said quietly. The connection established immediately. War Chief Thakmer's face filled the screen, his eyes bright with cruel satisfaction. "Do you surrender, human? Will you dissolve your pathetic confederation now?" Jake looked at the alien commander for several long seconds before speaking. "You have 24 hours to return our children unharmed. After that, we will demonstrate why the galaxy feared us for 10,000 years." Thakmer laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. "You threaten me? Your people have grown? Soft during your long peace, you have forgotten how to fight." "We have forgotten how to show mercy," Jake replied, his voice carrying a coldness that made even his own crew shiver. "There is a difference." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in absolute silence. Jake turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, who had been a peaceful communications specialist just days before. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Execute Battle Plan Omega. No prisoners, no mercy, no surrender." The words sent a chill through everyone who heard them. Battle Plan Omega was from the old archives, a strategy so brutal that it had been sealed away after the Treaty of Eternal Harmony. It was designed for enemies who had committed unforgivable acts, and it offered no quarter to those who faced it. The Confederation Council convened an emergency session, their representatives frantically trying to prevent what they saw as a catastrophic escalation. The chamber buzzed with urgent discussions as delegates from peaceful species tried to find a diplomatic solution. Ambassador Peter Davis sat quietly in the human section, no longer listening to the debate. His hands rested calmly on his desk, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made the other delegates uncomfortable. When the Altarian representative approached him, her silver skin shimmering with nervous energy. "Ambassador Davis, surely. You can convince your people to reconsider this course of action. Violence will only breed more violence." Peter looked up at her, his expression calm but terrifying. "My people tried peace for 3,000 years. We built a better galaxy together. We shared our knowledge, our culture, our dreams, and in return, monsters stole our children and murdered them on live broadcast." He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I resign my position as ambassador to the Confederation Council. From this moment forward, humanity speaks with one voice, and that voice says this: return our children or burn." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs as Peter walked out, leaving his diplomatic credentials on the desk behind him. The age of human diplomacy was over. Dr. Lisa Parker worked frantically in the medical bay on New Eden, coordinating with Earth's medical archives to prepare for what was coming. The old files contained information about trauma treatment, battlefield medicine, and the psychological care of soldiers returning from war. "Dr. Parker," said Maria Santos, the mother whose daughter had been taken, "I want to volunteer for the rescue mission. I can fight." Lisa looked at the woman who had been a peaceful teacher just days before. Maria's eyes burned with the same fire that was spreading through every human in the galaxy. "The fleet doesn't have room for civilians, Maria, but they'll need medical support when they bring the children home." "When?" Maria asked, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "Not if." "When," Lisa confirmed, her own voice carrying the same deadly calm that had taken hold of their entire species. "Because we are going to get them back." The human fleet jumped into hyperspace at precisely midnight, their destination the heart of Corvani space. The journey would take 6 hours, and when they arrived, they would bring with them the accumulated fury of 3,000 years of suppressed warrior instincts. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Wanderer, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace flow past their viewports. Her crew worked in perfect silence, each person focused on the task ahead. They were no longer explorers or scientists. They were humanity's sword, and they were about to remind the galaxy why their species had once been feared. "Captain," reported her tactical officer, "we're receiving updates from the other ships. All weapon systems are functioning at optimal levels. The fleet is ready for battle." Helen nodded, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Signal the fleet. In 6 hours we show the Corvani what happens when someone hurts our children." In the holding cells of the Corvani fortress, the captured human children huddled together in the darkness. Kevin Chun held Amy Roberts close as she cried for Danny Foster, the boy who had been murdered, to make a point. Around them, other children wept quietly, their young minds struggling to understand the cruelty they had witnessed. "They're coming for us," Kevin whispered, his voice carrying a certainty that surprised even him. "I can feel it somehow. Our people are coming, and they're angry." Amy looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. "How can you be sure?" Kevin smiled, and for a moment he looked older than his 8 years. "Because we're human, and humans protect their own." Outside the fortress, Corvani guards patrolled the walls, confident in their strength and the power of their weapons. They had no idea that death was approaching them through hyperspace, carried by a species that had remembered what it meant to be truly dangerous. The 24 hours were almost up, and humanity's patience was at an end. The galaxy was about to learn that there were some lines that should never be crossed, and some prices that were too terrible to pay. The children would be rescued, or the Corvani would burn. There would be no middle ground. The assault on Korvac Prime began at dawn, when the first light of the alien sun touched the fortress walls where human children were held prisoner. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace with a violence that sent shockwaves through the Corvani. Defense network, 237 ships appearing in perfect formation around the enemy homeworld. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the tactical display as his fleet took position. The Corvani defense fleet was already moving to intercept them, but their movements seemed slow and clumsy compared to the precision of the human formation. "All ships report ready for battle," announced Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, her voice carrying the same cold efficiency that had taken hold of every human in the fleet. Jake nodded, his eyes never leaving the enemy vessels. "Signal the fleet. Execute Battle Plan Omega. Show them what happens when someone hurts our children." The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Corvani had expected conventional warfare, ship-to-ship combat following the old patterns that had governed conflict for millennia. Instead, they faced something that no species had seen for 3,000 years, humanity unleashed. Captain Helen Rodriguez led her squadron in a maneuver called Broken Arrow, a formation designed to punch through heavy defenses by using smaller ships as shields for larger ones. The tactic was brutal and effective, requiring crews to risk their lives without hesitation for the greater good. "Wanderer to all ships," Helen broadcast over the tactical channel. "Follow my lead, we're going through their line." The human ships dove toward the Corvani fleet like birds of prey, their weapons firing in perfect coordination. The enemy's heavy battleships found themselves surrounded and outmaneuvered by vessels that should have been easy targets. The humans fought with a fury that made their peaceful past seem like a distant dream. War Chief Thakmer watched from his command center on the planet's surface as his mighty fleet burned in the void above. His scarred face twisted with disbelief as ship after ship fell to the human assault. These were the same species that had spent 3,000 years building gardens and writing poetry. "How are they doing this?" he snarled at his tactical officer. "They are explorers, not warriors." "Sir, they're using formations from the old archives," the officer replied, his voice trembling with fear. "Tactics that haven't been seen since the ancient wars. They fight like they were born for it." Thakmer's eyes narrowed as he realized the truth. The humans had not forgotten how to fight. They had simply chosen not to, and that choice had made them infinitely more dangerous when they finally decided to stop holding back. The orbital bombardment began as soon as the last Corvani ship fell silent. The human fleet turned their weapons on the military installations below, targeting each one with surgical precision. The bombardment was not random destruction but calculated warfare, designed to cripple the enemy's ability to fight while leaving the civilian population unharmed. General Carl Anderson watched the battle from the command center on Earth, his weathered face showing satisfaction as each target was eliminated. The old soldier had seen war before, but never anything like this. His people fought with the accumulated fury of 3 millennia of suppressed warrior instincts. "Ground assault teams report ready for deployment," Colonel Janet Rivers announced from her position at the tactical console. Carl nodded, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the fortress where the children were held. "Send them down. And remember, the primary objective is rescue. Everything else is secondary." The ground assault began at noon, when the alien sun was highest in the sky. Human soldiers descended from their ships like falling stars, their armor gleaming in the harsh light. These were not the professional warriors of the old armies, but ordinary people transformed by rage and purpose. General Anderson insisted on leading the assault personally. Despite his 73 years, he moved with the fluid grace of a soldier. Half his age, his weapon held ready as he advanced toward the fortress walls. Behind him, teachers and farmers and engineers followed, all united by the same burning need to rescue their children. The Corvani defenders fought bravely, but they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The humans moved, with perfect coordination, their tactics flawless, and their resolve absolute. They showed no mercy to those who had taken their young, and they asked for none in return. The fortress walls fell within 2 hours. The human soldiers poured through the breaches like a tide of vengeance, their weapons cutting through the enemy defenders with methodical efficiency. They swept through the corridors with the certainty of those who knew exactly what they were looking for. Dr. Lisa Parker waited in the medical bay of the rescue ship, her equipment prepared for the worst. She had seen the reports from the fortress, and she knew that some of the children might be badly hurt. Her hands shook slightly as she checked her supplies, but her voice remained steady as she coordinated with the other medical teams. "All teams report ready," she announced over the communication system. "We're prepared for immediate treatment of any injuries." The rescue operation took 6 hours from start to finish. The human soldiers moved through the fortress like a precision instrument, eliminating threats and securing the children with the same cold efficiency they had shown in space. They found the young prisoners in the underground levels, huddled together in cells that stank of fear and despair. Kevin Chin was the first to see the human soldiers approaching, their armor covered in dust and the signs of battle. His 8-year-old face lit up with joy as he recognized the familiar uniforms and the gentle eyes behind the combat visors. "You came for us," he whispered, his voice breaking with relief. "We will always come for you," replied the soldier, her voice soft despite the harsh filter of her helmet speaker. "You are our children, and we protect our own." Amy Roberts clutched the torn remains of her drawing pad as she was carried from the fortress, her young mind struggling to process what she had seen. The gentle adults who had raised her in peace had become warriors to save her, and she would never forget the price they had paid. War Chief Thakmer was brought before Jake Morrison in the ruins of his command center, his armor cracked and his pride broken. The Corvani leader expected to be executed immediately, but the human commander had other plans. "You hurt our children," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying more menace than any shout. "That is unforgivable, but we are not like you. You will stand trial and justice will be served according to law." Thakmer looked up at the human with confusion. "Why do you not kill me? I would kill you without hesitation." "Because that is the difference between us," Jake replied. "We remember what it means to be civilized, even when we are forced to be savage." The aftermath of the battle reshaped the galaxy's understanding of humanity. The Confederation Council, humbled by the display of power, created new protocols for protecting innocent civilians across all member worlds. The other species looked at their human neighbors with a mixture of respect and fear, finally understanding what they had lived alongside for 3,000 years. The children were returned to New Eden, where they began the long process of healing from their ordeal. Dr. Parker worked tirelessly to help them recover, but she knew that they would carry the scars of their experience for the rest of their lives. They had seen the worst of what the galaxy could offer, and they had also seen the best. Ambassador Peter Davis returned to his position at the Confederation Council, but he was a changed man. His diplomatic smile was colder now, his words carrying an edge that reminded everyone of what his people were capable of when pushed too far. "We chose peace for 3,000 years, he told the assembled delegates. "We built a better galaxy together, and we will continue to do so. But make no mistake, if you threaten our children again, we will remind you why the universe once trembled at the name of humanity." The peace was restored, but it was different now. It was not the peace of the weak who had no choice but to submit, but the peace of the strong who chose restraint. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their capacity for war, but their ability to set aside that capacity for the greater good. On New Eden, the crystal gardens bloomed again, and children played among the rainbow lights. But now their laughter carried a different note, the sound of those who knew they were protected by guardians who would never again forget the fire that burned in human hearts. The peace endured, stronger than before, protected by those who remembered the terrible cost of breaking it.